You're watching Morning Live, and thanks so much for being with us. Now, the General Industries Workers Union of South Africa, GIWUSA, says it doesn't believe that government interventions and proposals from political parties as well as think tanks in the country will actually solve South Africa's deepening economic crisis. The trade union says that while South Africa's challenges are multifaceted, the real problem is government's evasiveness in dealing with fundamental issues facing the working class. Mammetlwe Sebei, who is president of GIWUSA, joins us here in studio for a discussion, and Tsidiso Disenyane, an economist and at Africa Trade Policy Strategist, joins us from our SABC studios in Hatfield. Gentlemen, thanks for your time this morning. Mammetlwe, let me start with you. Your union, you say nobody is asking the fundamental question of what lies at the root of these problems that we are seeing. What do you believe are the root causes?
Well, I mean, firstly, we must call this crisis what it is. It is, an organic, deep, and of course, not a cyclical crisis of capitalism itself, at the core of which is overproduction and overcapacity in almost every industry. And I think none of the analysts in this country, none of the government think tanks and strategies are speaking to that crisis. And that's the reason that none of the solutions that have been proposed are going to solve both the problems in the economy, but most importantly, the problem and the crisis faced by the working class and the poor of growing unemployment and deepening levels of poverty.
Unpack that for us further. When you talk about overproduction and overstock, what do you mean by that?
I mean, you just have to look at almost every major industry, both in the world and in this country. I mean, the steel manufacturing, for instance, has in excess capacity of over 400 million tons of steel, which has created a crisis in this country, evident from the restructuring that we see in ArcelorMittal, which is retaining about 2,000 workers. The second biggest manufacturer of steel, High Steel, has been in business rescue, and of course, at the moment, it's been acquired and only been bailed out by a takeover by ArcelorMittal itself. Now, all of that, including, of course, overproduction, overcapacity in the mining industry, we know that platinum industry has been having excess capacity for quite a long time. Every single industry that one can think about is in crisis in this country and in the world. And that is at the core of a declining levels of confidence. The recent survey that was released shows that South African Business Confidence Index had just hit 20% index point, which is the lowest in 20 years. Now that means that the confidence of the capitalist class is at its lowest under a billionaire president who is pursuing policies that are more than friendly to them, lower than it was even at the time of Zuma years. And what that reveals is that the issues of corruption, incompetence, mismanagement of the state resources and of the economic policy itself were issue, of course, during the Zuma years, but were never the fundamental problems, and in any event, decisive to the crisis that we experienced in Zuma years. And that crisis was always rooted in the crisis of capitalism in this country and at the world, in the world as a whole.
So what do you believe has happened from the Zuma administration to the Ramaphosa administration to exacerbate this problem so extensively?
Well, you just have to look at the fact that since for the capitalist class, there is no, profitable investment, precisely for reasons that I've mentioned, of, overproduction, that almost every market is flooded, and the result of which is that they are not investing. And you just have to look at every indication of that. The level of investment has been falling. And that is the reason that you look at capital formation, which was at something close to 10%, 9.2, in the period of the economic boom from 2000 to 2008, to, of course, post the crisis period when it hit the low of 0.6%. And what that shows is that the capitalist class are on strike, and the working class are paying the consequence of that. It is us, workers and the poor, who are suffering from the restructuring that is taking place. I've mentioned 2,000 jobs that we are losing in ArcelorMittal. Of course, number of workers are being put on short times, are being laid off, they are having a cut in benefits, and the working class in general is taking a hammering as the capitalist class are making it a point that we are paying the full cost of this economic crisis. And that is also clear from the cuts in public spending, on housing that has created an escalation in an already huge housing crisis that we are having. Housing backlog is increasing and growing by over 173,000 houses on top of the 2.3 million houses that we are already lacking. Now, that is a crisis, and none of the government, planners, and none of the political parties are speaking to that crisis and how we solve it.
Tsidiso, you're an economist, so what is your take on what Mammetlwe is saying right now?
The South African economy is definitely in the doldrums. And basically, the key problem here is domestic demand. Private consumption has went down, which is quite a huge part of the GDP, about 60% thereof. And government cannot support the economy through infrastructure investments because of the current situation regarding fiscal consolidation and trying to reconfigure some of the SOEs, state-owned enterprises. And private investment also has gone down. And, with the domestic demand in this situation, we have to look at the export market, where we believe that, South Africa can be able to gain much gains, especially in Africa. We do have... we do export to the U.S. under the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, but, with the trade tensions happening between the U.S. and China, South Africa has been caught in between, and over 2,400 tariffs, government subsidies, and government procurement restrictions have impacted on South Africa's exports. We need to definitely look into the African continent. We know that the African Continental Free Trade Area has just entered into force now in May. It will bring about a market of about 1 billion people, over $1 trillion of GDP for the South African investors and exporters. And I believe that South Africa can focus its efforts over there. 26% of our exports goes into the continent, and 70% of our manufactured goods goes into Africa. We need to put our eggs into that particular segment of the market in order to boost the local market or the local economy.
But just talking about trade in Africa and what is currently happening, how effective have African countries been in trading with one another? Over the past decades or so, intra-Africa trade has been pretty much negligible, around 13%. Some are quoting about 15%. And mostly this trade is more on the primary sector. We believe that we need to develop the industrial productive capabilities of most of the African economy so that we can better trade more. But there are also other hindrances, especially transportation costs, which are making sure that the African intra-African trade stayed at around that percentage. Should we be able to unbottle those transportation costs, we'll be able to trade more as Africans, and building on the industrial production capacity that should be able to ensure that African economies do trade amongst one another. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area brings that opportunity in terms of bringing down the tariffs, but there's also non-tariff barriers that we have to look into in order to ensure that most of the economies can be able to enjoy the economies of scale being provided by the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Mammetlwe, do you believe that that offers some sort of opportunity, perhaps trading more on the continent? Because, as Tsidiso says, at best 15% the level of trade, intra-trade on the continent.
I mean, firstly, the idea that we can continue to export, our problems, it doesn't make sense at all, because you just have to look at the declines in level of, growth in the world trade, which has hit the bottom of, 2.2% last year, from the highest point of, about, 7% annual growth. But although I think also the additional problem is that, China in particular has overtaken the rest of the world insofar as, grabbing Africa as a market for itself. So reality is that there's no way out, because South Africa just doesn't have the kind of technological capacity and advantage over China and other advanced capitalist countries that have invested and have, revolutionized production in many ways. Some of the economists have even pointed out that we are barely, into a third industrial revolution in many of our industries, and people are already talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And the poor levels of investment that has been beginning to speak to that. So there is no really a way out. And of course, domestically, because of the poverty of the working class, 10.2 million unemployed, half of the population is in poverty. And of course, of those that are fortunate to be working, over 60% of them are earning below 3.5 thousand rand per month.
So
that simply means there cannot be a market, on the basis of capitalism for the manufacturing industry, the manufactured goods that we need to be producing to industrialize in order to overcome the structural problems and constraints in the economy, including creating millions of jobs that we need.
So what are you suggesting? How do you suggest government approaches this problem?
Well, I don't think the government has capacity for solution. And as I've said, none of the political parties of capitalism really do have solution. For us, solution is simple: socialism. And what does that mean? It means, it's a simple idea actually, that the working class, through their mass organizations at trade union levels, at levels of community, taking, building and rebuilding their organization, building a movement that can expropriate a class that is failing to manage the economy and society through a nationalization of the key sectors of the economy, so that we can begin to plan the economy in the interest of many, because this is only a crisis insofar as capitalism is concerned. Because think about it, Zekina. The whole pre-capitalist past of humanity would have been shocked at the idea that today we can't feed children because there's too much food we are producing. We can't clothe, our people because there is too much clothing and textile. We can't, people are starving simply because there is too much that we are producing, and there is productive capacity that is in excess of demand and in excess of our requirements. People in the past would have been shocked by that. So this is only a crisis insofar as capitalism is concerned. On the basis of the planning of the economy, it will be possible to make sure that we eradicate poverty, we build houses we need, we build schools, we build clinics, and of course the infrastructure much needed to alleviate the poverty and the suffering of the masses of the people in this country, and of course the world at large.
Tsidiso, what's your response to that? Where does the solution lie? Is capitalism the main problem here?
Well, capitalism is not really the main problem. Currently, the South African government is quite constrained, both from a monetary policy point of view, and also from a fiscal policy point of view. It cannot be able to inject more money into the economy in order to boost it, or even decrease the interest rates, because of our reliance on our portfolio income in order to boost our balance of payments. We cannot move in terms of the fiscal policy because government has embarked on fiscal consolidation. We can basically increase the tax base, increase some of the tax rates like we did with VAT. Largely, what the South African government should look into, it's outside. That is focusing more on trade policy. And I've mentioned that in order to diversify our export basket and not only be dependent on our exports to the US or to the EU or to China, here is the market right next door, the
but
African Continental Free Trade Area.
According to Mammetlwe, that would be more of the same. And he's saying that is not the solution. He says we need to be doing something radically different, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said, the poverty of the working class is a major issue here. How many workers again can afford a TV set in this country? How many can afford just a washing machine? I mean, how many can afford the kind of basic things that would be a market for manufacturing industry in this country? And that's the reason all the key sectors of the economy,
but how
from
is
mining to
socialism going to solve that problem? How is socialism going to solve that problem?
What does it mean? I mean, we have, people in this country that are without houses. There is over 2.3 million houses to be built. There is major backlog in the creation of, schools, in building of hospitals and all these things. And for every of these things, we have the capacity, including excess capacity in the construction industry, where we could create millions of jobs to make sure that people build houses we need, build clinics, build schools, build roads, build things that will be of need, and make sure that we
isn't
feed
government
the hungry
doing
and the
that?
starving in
Isn't
this
government doing that? Government is opening schools every other day, hospitals, there are all these facilities being opened all over the show. There is a clear social compact in place between government and the people that is meant to deliver upon these things that you mentioned. Perhaps not the jobs, but everything else is being delivered upon.
Well, how do you then explain that the housing backlog is 2.3 million and is growing by 173,000 a year? How do you explain that the children in my village of Ranchavele are still unable, to go to schools when it's raining because a river is flooded? How do you explain the fact that many children in this country are learning under trees instead of classroom and so on? That people are dying because of the hospital and the clinic facilities that are simply collapsing before our eyes. And of course, roads, are untethered, are unrepaired, and the infrastructure.
But do we not know what the reasons are for that? It's corruption. It's the slow pace of development. But let me bring Tsidiso in. Tsidiso, perhaps you can weigh in here.
South Africa's problems are not really at a national level. We've tried everything, and I think the current policy that we've embarked on is fiscal consolidation, which is happening quite well within the national government level. The problems are at the local government, whereby people there are eating with pretty much impunity. If we can resolve our problems at the local level, we should be able to move forward as a country.
And the question, of course, is why aren't we able to? Your parting shot for us, Mammetlwe.
I mean, for us, the alternatives are really simple. It is either there is a fundamental transformation of society, which we've argued that for us is a socialist transformation that means the working class take over the means of production, or barbarism on the basis of capitalism. The barbarism that we have seen in the xenophobic violence of the past, few months, where the working class and the poor are turning against each other, the barbarism of the climate change, the barbarism of the deepening levels of poverty and, crisis of the working class at all levels of society that we are facing.
Well, you will make up your mind as to where the answers lie to this. But I think a very interesting conversation, because pros and cons all around, but you decide where the answers actually lie. Thanks so much to our guest this morning, Mammetlwe Sebei, the president of GIWUSA, and also Tsidiso Disenyane, an economist at Africa Trade Policy Strategist. It brings us up to news time with Leanne.